What I'll try to do for the session is start at the beginning, and it is helpful if people ask questions, so don't feel as if you can't ask a question and just stop me mid-conversation, because there's a lot of information. I'll try and get through some of it, and I'll point to different places you can go and find more. But if there is something that you're not clear, you don't have to wait to the end until I stop talking to ask a question. So either raise your hand or just write something in the chat, and Fred or Keith can probably signpost me to it. So I'm going to start by just explaining what Twinmotion is. Hopefully you can see this web page. For those who aren't into online gaming, Epic Games have bought Twinmotion many years ago, and they're also buying a lot of scan software for buildings and virtual reality stuff. So you've got this Epic Games account, which will show you how to create, and then within that, the same engine, the Unreal Engine, I think it is, powers this software. So unlike BIM, unlike AutoCAD, you know, it's come from a different type of background, and it's also talking about how to quickly get photorealistic images. So in your career as an architect, you may find that you work for an office which is non-photorealistic. They'll draw images out of Photoshop, or you'll do an office which is BIM heavily orientated. And then there's a kind of a mixture where there's virtual reality, scanning buildings, getting a copy of it, and then getting your designs into that existing LiDAR scanner. So Twinmotion was created with the realization of the virtual reality, and so in that mind, it's got a lot of options, but also just to bear in mind, it's at the end of your workflow. So I'm guessing that many people use SketchUp, and I'll show you. I don't have SketchUp on this desktop, but I've got a SketchUp file, and I can show you how to import SketchUp. So the inputs are from your 3D software. You'll make stuff in another piece of software, whether it's SketchUp or Revit. Broadly, you'll import it. There's a number of ways to do that. Then you'll make it look more appealing with photorealistic. And then, crucially for Twinmotion, you've got this option to do a number of different outputs. And I think that's one of the strengths of Twinmotion, to improve your presentation. You can do renders, images, you can do videos, you can do fly-throughs, and you can do virtual reality spaces, which you can then invite people to walk around. So that's really an engaging thing, and it does it much more quickly than the other competition. So I think just for this session, I just want to talk about the beginnings of navigation, and then you can start to have a go. And if you wanted more in-depth at the end of that, we could probably arrange another one. So if you haven't got an Epic Games account, it doesn't really matter, but if you can see, and I'll probably just copy this into the chat box, is to create an account, you just go to twinmotion.com license. And if I go back to the web page, all you have to do is to scroll down to education license, and you'll get a free student's educator's license. Now, I would, everybody I've interacted with from many different countries have been able to download this and have been able to get the education license. So it's not necessarily been a difficulty. One thing to check for you is, does your VTC account enable you to do that? I suspect it does. You can get a free trial if that doesn't work, and you can see here that most of that worked apart from the resolution of it. So I think that's the only thing that you're going to compromise if you can't get this education license. You can still do everything that I'm pointing to today. Just the resolution of the image, how big you can blow it up, is probably limited. So have a go doing that. You just press download. It will come up with a couple of options, so you can log in. So all you have to do is to sign up for an Epic Games account. Then you'll be able to log in, and then you'll be able to sign in here. Then you'll download it. And when you install the Epic launcher, you'll get this kind of new window that appears. Some of you might be quite familiar with this. But when you go to the library on the left, so get an Epic Games account, download the installer, go to the library. If you haven't installed it already, there'll be on the library 2 buttons here, and you can see that one of them says install and one says launch. And if I hover over the title, one's newer than the other. So you can see that I've installed this one. So if you haven't installed it, you just press install and it'll run you through. It takes a while. It's quite a big file. And look at the requirements. Now I've got an i7 Intel ProBook by HP. I'm using that right now, and I suppose that's a good thing that I'm using it, because it shows you can use it on the laptop, but it was designed for a desktop. So if you've got machines in VTC, you've got a computer at home, just check the specs of your laptop to be able to use it. My laptop hasn't got a separate graphics card, but it can still work with an integrated graphics card. So that's just one thing to be mindful of, is when you're actually installing it, just double check the software requirements on your computer so that you know you've got the right hardware. And so what you did see then is I just clicked run or open, and then that Epic Games window will close down, and then this Twinmotion will start up. So I think that's probably quite simple to get up to speed with. You can do that in your own time. And you can see at the top that it's got not for commercial use, education, right? So the one thing I just wanted to start with is navigation. This has come from the gaming environment. So unlike Photoshop and Revit, even to some extent SketchUp, it doesn't perform in the same location of the buttons. So in terms of navigation, you're not going to see a ribbon at the top and have commands and buttons on here. So you will have to get used to a number of these little arrows that come along and buttons down the side. So you've got a main screen, and then to the right and the left, you've got what you see. So you can see here that I've got a thing called a starting ground. This is this sandy beach thing, and this is the scene, right? So when you want to explore things that are inside the actual world, the model, it'll be on the right. When you want to bring things in, it'll be on the left, and you've got materials and vegetation, objects, light. So we can go through a couple of these. So that's the main difference. And then what you want to do, so what are you looking at on the right? What can you bring in is on the left. And at the bottom is what can you do with the image and the world that you've created. So you can import things. You've got context and environments. You've got settings, but actually a lot of the settings are in another place. So you can get to those 2 places. And then you've got the type of image or virtual reality you're trying to set up. And then the last button is export. So import, bit of context, settings, what type of mode or media you've got, and then how do you get it out. And hopefully today you'll be able to see how to bring something in from SketchUp and then how to take something else through maybe image. We'll check whether a video or a VR can be handled on this laptop. So I'm just going slowly, and Keith, please shout up if anything's unclear or the sound is cutting out. But what I did is I've done a couple of mock-ups just to show you it, but I've also got hold of a SketchUp file here. So you can see that I've got an SKP file, and let me just check. Has anybody got SketchUp files? Are you using SketchUp or using Revit? What's the consensus? Maybe Keith can answer my question.
They use both. Some students use SketchUp and some of them use Revit.
Great, okay. So one thing to bear in mind is when you import, you'll get these type of things here. So you start with a blank page, you can walk around, move around, yeah? And what I'm pressing now is my left mouse button, so similar to navigation. And if you've ever used gaming, you've got the WASD, right? So if I press a keyboard and I move, you can see how slowly I'm moving. And if I go A, I'm going left, backwards, is S, and that to the right is D. So on your keyboard, you can walk around. Q goes up and E. So to navigate around this thing, you can see that there's a big platform, lots of buildings in the background, which is just the background. And the numbers at the keyboard, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, tell you how fast. So if I press 6 now, hopefully I will be able to move much quicker. Can you see how much quicker? And if I get worried and I'm moving too quickly, I can press 3, and then I can move a little bit slower, so you can go up and down. And the other thing to be mindful of is, unlike SketchUp, it's got a different type of grab. What's the correct word? Grab vertices. And this will be, I'll explain this imagery in a minute when we bring in an object. So navigation is to use your mouse. You can use your left button and it does one thing. You can use your right mouse button and it does another thing. And then you can bring, and now I'm just coming out of the ground because I'm going to import something now. So the other thing to do is you want to bring in something that you've created in 3D from your SketchUp shape. And you'll notice that you've got like a data, direct link, landscape, point cloud. So these are all options, and we're only going to really do geometry today because direct link is, you can have a live link with your SketchUp or your Revit. So you've got a button that you have to download from Twinmotion, and it's a plugin to install in SketchUp or into Revit. I don't think we'll go into that detail. I think it's kind of like a datasmith file, and there's a video you can watch how to do that. So if you're going to do this a lot, and you're going to go back and forth between the SketchUp model and changing it, and then once you've seen it in Twinmotion, the direct link route is the best way to do that, because it'll set up a link, and when you've got the window open in Revit or SketchUp, you press the button and it will automatically upload and update into Twinmotion. So there's a kind of interaction there. Datasmith, that's what it's called. So geometry is actually just a file. So the simplest way to get something in is to have a SketchUp file, SKP file. And we're going to just press open, and hopefully I can find it. Right, so I put it in documents, so it's easily there. You can see that you've got all these other variations of file types. So you've got FBX, and then SketchUp file, object files, Cinema 4D, GLTF and GLB. They're all kind of like point clouds or LiDAR scanners and Sketchfab files. So if you in the future find something on the web which you want a good background for your render, sometimes they'll come in those formats. And then you've got 3D Studio Max and other types of files there. PLY was something Google set up. So just that, it's always good to look at what file types are available to which ones you're going to export. So happily, SketchUp is not something you have to convert. You can just save it, right? So when you're going to press open, the key thing to remember when you're importing it is keep hierarchy. Now, one of the options that you can see is collapse by material or collapse all. So if you want to think about it, if you've got lots of they call objects or groups in SketchUp, and you import it and you collapse it by the material, it would grab the material from SketchUp. And say if it's all white marble, you just haven't, in the workflow, you're not bothered to change the materials in SketchUp, it will only see one object then, because it'll collapse it by material and make all those complex shapes into one material. And therefore, you can't edit it in Twinmotion. If you collapse all, it will just disregard material and just collapse every single shape into one thing. So what sometimes people get stuck with is they don't correct that option. So if you've not if it's the first time you've opened it and you want to import, just make sure you click on the option button, click on the keep hierarchy, because I think by default it clicks on collapse by material, and then import, and hopefully it will be reading data. And you can see now that there is a series of shapes that have come in. So I'm just going to do a bit of manipulation of the shapes to be able to illustrate what you can do with it. So this is a project we've done with another set of students, possibly just a slightly more advanced than you, but I'm sure you have the same type of challenges. We gave them a whole series of shapes, and if I click with my left mouse button, you can see these shapes. It's actually part of a building, which is in a pavilion in Bahrain. Each of these shapes is a separate object. You may even have a different material on some of them. So when you import into SketchUp, you can still select those objects separately. And some people draw with a box to orientate which way they're rotating it. But if we take one of these objects, you can see that I can start to manipulate this object here. And you can see that there's all these different buttons here. Right? So similar to SketchUp, you've got a set of commands or buttons you can press to change the orientation of an object. Even if you bring it into Twinmotion, you can still do some final tweaks. And for every object that you import, this is an opportunity. So you can move this around. You see the way it's, I press the middle and I can move it in multiple dimensions. I'm going to just bring that back. If I press the blue arrow, we've got the X, Y, and Z. So the Z is blue. If I press the green line, I'm moving it in that direction. And if I press that one, right. And then this one's the easy rotation. But if I expanded this option, and then I've got one here called rotate, it gives me these extra circumference colors, right? So it's going to rotate around the Z axis or the X or the Y axis. So that means you can actually start off in SketchUp with very simple shapes, and I can very quickly rotate some objects around. Click on that one, bring this one up, move it along. So you can see that you can actually build a building through shapes and start to get massing studies very quickly. So that's the basic principle of navigation. You can see all the objects have come in here, and I can turn them on and off. So a little bit like Photoshop. You can see that I've got the command. I can turn the whole thing off now that it's important. And one thing to bear in mind, if you've imported this skip file, sometimes it will only appear here once because you've actually imported it and then you've placed it into this scene here. Some people get confused when they start to do things later on, and actually what's happened is they've placed it into the object space twice. And so what a good way to check if you're having any problems is just to go into here and say, oh, I've got 2 of these copies, and you can turn one and off. So if I grab that, well, if I import it again, it'll be one here, but it'll come into there. So if you want to turn things on and off, you can go in here. If you want to create an image which helps you navigate. So there's 2 things that the image does before I go into more complex things. So navigation can be done for your mouse, can be done for the keyboard, WASD, as if you're walking around a pointer and shooter game. So if you're familiar with that. And then the other thing that you can do is go to the bottom left and say media, create image. So do that again, image, and then press that button. A new snapshot of the camera view will come in. So this is really handy because if I now zoom in right into here and then I create image, I can flip between the 2. So when you've got really complex buildings or you're moving around a lot, it can be quite slow because you're a small camera in a big world. It's a good idea to create images to help you navigate. And if I just do one more, you can see I can just create an image here. So I've got 1, 2, 3, and I'm jumping around the world much quicker than if I'm trying to move around with the mouse. So that helps sometimes. So the one thing to remember about the image before I move on to anything else is that you will have a menu and this little refresh button. So if I have a view here and I change a material and I do other things, that object will change and everything. But if I move the camera just slightly, say you're going to create an image which has got a certain focal point, or you're going to change the settings on the camera, bear in mind those relate to the image where my mouse pointer is pointing to. And if you don't press this button, it won't save those slight tweaks. So for instance, if I just move ever so slightly, if I wanted to get something into the camera frame and I don't press this button, it will go back to where it was. So there's a difference between what you edit inside the world and what you edit about the camera view. So if you are slightly tweaking the camera view, and there's a lot of things you can tweak to make it more photorealistic because it's a photo rendering type of software, do remember to press this. So I'll just do it now. I'll move over here, and hopefully you'll see in the little window, it slightly changes there. So it'll refresh and auto-save again, that settings. So the first part is opening Twinmotion, getting an account, signing in, then importing. You can do import down here, press that button, click geometry, find the file, press open, make sure you keep hierarchy, and then obviously save. So you save as test 3 or whatever you want it to be. And it does, these files do start to accumulate large file spaces. So one thing is the computer hardware, the other one is space to save it on. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to open up which one should I open? I'm going to open up one which actually has a few more examples on it. And let's have a look. Which one should I open? So that I won't spend the time rotating all these objects, right? So let's see if that one works. So while I'm waiting for it to load up, is there any questions about opening Twinmotion on the right, on the left, importing a SketchUp file, or we're all okay? And I'll just look at the chat box if anybody's got there.
我有冇問題啊？想問下，我可以幫你搞佢啊？冇問題。Seems they have no questions.
Good. Okay. It's okay to have questions, and hopefully I'm going slow enough so people can see with me and not too slow. But it's yeah. So it's a bit of a tricky thing when you can't see people's faces. So it might take a while because it's updating everything as it starts, and then once it's in, it's a little bit quicker. We hope.
So Simon, I used to based on the plugin, using the Twinmotion plugin from the to use the change the SketchUp to bring it to the Twinmotion. So it means we doesn't need to use the plugin. We can directly import
That's
from.
great. So I would advise the first time that you do something is just to import. So don't bother the plugins just now, because it's just to get you familiar with navigating, playing around with all the different settings. And it takes a little bit of time to set up. And then also when you update from SketchUp, you need to do it in a certain order, so you kind of create the right files. So this datasmith is like a mid thing in the middle. So the plugin links to something and it keeps a record of what you're doing, and then it opens up Twinmotion. So you don't have to do it. If you have time and capacity, you can do it, and everybody's capable of doing it. But my advice when you're first starting this to improve your presentation is just think of it as, can I get enough of the SketchUp model made where I feel that I can get a shot of a camera shot, and all the things that I'm not going to see in that camera, maybe I don't model, and then import that file into Twinmotion, and you don't need to save it anything other than a SKP file. So yes, Keith, the short answer is you don't have to get the plugin. Eventually you will, yeah. Does that answer your question, sorry?
Yeah, sure. Thanks.
Okay, great. So when you open something, I'm going to show you a few things here, right? My screen doesn't seem to be fully. Okay, so hopefully, yeah, okay, it's starting to work. I'm going to go to a different image, and what I'm going to show you now is wondering why let me just press that. Is that gone? Yeah, okay, I can see it all now. So when you bring it in, it'll come in not as a photorealistic image, and it'll come in as like a preview. So when you click on the media that I showed you before, and you click on image, you can see that I've saved a load of camera views here, and each of them are slightly different, right? So I'm going to click on this one because this is the next step from what you have just seen. So you can see here, I've just taken those shapes and I've just rotated them all and stuck them together, and I've made a building. Now you can do that in SketchUp, but the interesting thing is I can then change the camera view to be able to settle on the ground, and I can change the sky, and I can change the light levels, and I can change the materials. So that's what this program's really good for. And you can see that I've just set up a camera view and I've started to place materials. These aren't realistic because they're very big, but I did want to show you a few things about how you edit and adapt the materials and the camera views. So in terms of camera views, you'll notice that there's like a duplicate rename. You can create a copy of it, but then on the bottom of it, if you can see, if the screen is not too small, I can change the name of it, but on the other side, there's more. So this is where we change the settings of each of the cameras themselves. It's like a virtual camera, right? And here's the breadcrumb. So if you get lost of where you are, you can always go back and say, okay, I'm in image 7 settings. I'll go back to image, and I can see all those, or go back to media. I'm going to change this one because I think it might show up a bit more clearly. One thing to note is, I don't know if you've noticed, or a part of Lumion, there's a thing called ray tracing, isn't there, or path tracing, right? This computer will install Twinmotion on my laptop, but it's not powerful enough because it hasn't got a dedicated graphics card to do ray tracing. So if you do install it on the desktop, you're going to get even better results and even quicker results. So there will be some things which are just grayed out. But what you can see here is you've got lightings, and one thing to make it, in most photorealistic images, and this isn't photorealistic, right? It's one stage towards getting more photorealistic, is a lot of people have a different white balance. I'm in Bahrain, it's going to have a warmer tint. So you've got different ways to change the intensity of the light in the camera. So I'm just going to talk about the camera settings, and I'll talk about materials, and then I'll talk about extras and objects and exporting, right? So when we're talking about the camera setting, a lot of these you won't change very much. The exposure you don't want to change, it'll just go really white. So you want to get that down to approximately 0. The default is approximately. But it is always good to check what the white balance is. And as a rule, if you're in Northern Europe, or if you look online and you go into any of the photorealistic images, it just happens to be, I don't know if it's a preference or whether it's because the majority of images have been created in the northern climate, is you normally set it around 600. So you can isolate that number and you can press the number. And that creates a little bit bluer background of the whole imagery. So whenever you're looking at something, you think, oh, it doesn't look quite right, it's a little bit too warm, there's something which it doesn't match my expectations. Sometimes it's just bringing the light balance down, and let me just put it back, 6,000, 6,600, and it just takes the intensity out of it. The same goes with sun intensity. This is the amount of sun, and it reduces the amount of directional light, so you can change that one to what you want. And moon intensity doesn't really affect it. Ambient does affect it quite a lot, so it's kind of reflectance of materials, and you can see that it's taken a while, but it'll bring it much brighter, and the shadows and the darkness will be less contrasting. So I would always leave it around about this to start off with. You can go into more. The other interesting thing, and what you can set is let me just double check. Right, okay, so unusually, that's what I forgot there. When you click on the environment, there's 3 different types of background which can affect how realistic it looks. So you can click on the backdrop, and a lot of the time it comes in as this one, dynamic sky, and I'm going to press it, but some of these buttons take a little time. So can you see the way it's just changed? It's a flatter background. It's dynamic. It'll relate to the environment in the seasons. But if you have the backdrop of HDRI, it will take a while and it'll lift everything up, and it's actually got quite closer. So there's like a physical dome in the space which you can rotate. And when you go to more, you're going to change the settings of that actual dome. So you can, in the future, import a different image, which could be a 3D camera view, 360 camera view of the context that you're putting it in. You can rotate it. So you can see in the background, the shadows are moving because the sky has a preset visualization of where the sun's coming from, and sorry, it's trying to refresh as quickly as it can. So this is one way to change the settings. The size of it, as you get bigger, it might affect it, but as you get smaller, you can see that the dome is actually going into the building. So that's one way to change the settings a little bit. And you can raise it off the ground as well, and you can turn the weather on. So I'm just going to go back. For this purposes, I'm probably just going to get dynamic sky, which is what you would get. So you can play around with those. The other interesting thing is, that was lighting. The other thing that you always want to bring it to is location. So this little thing is refreshing the map, and you can move it. You can say, I'm going to drop my piece into where I am, and I'm in Bahrain at the moment. So you can see if I'm scrolling in, just zoom in. So you could bring it to Hong Kong. I'm just going to change the location, and that will change the type of light that comes in. So it's getting very realistic in the light. You can change the time of day, and if I move this, hopefully you can see the shadows change. And we've got the evening time. And then hopefully you can see that it's very easily navigatable. You can change these settings quite easily. And obviously in the dead of summer, it's going to be quite hot. I mean, if I change it around here. So sometimes for me, personally, I tend to bring it in the spring, change the setting around here to get some shadows, and sometimes it's better to get some shadows which are coming into the foreground. So when you're setting up a camera view, you're always thinking about foreground, as I'm looking at it, middle ground and background, and the shadows are part of that conversation. And the other thing to bear in mind is you can see here that there's like a circle with a north point. So if you brought the model in, you don't have to rotate the model necessarily in the space. You can rotate the north point. So clearly, if I rotate the north, which is, the red point, it will then change the direction of the shadows because it's moving the sun to reflect on where the sun should be in the sky. So you can move around all of those. You can change the picture to a city, or there's a few default settings, and that image can also rotate around. So for each camera view, you can change all of these things, right, for location and lighting. The other interesting thing, which for subtlety, might not be very good for this image that I've got with the models and people, but it's really helpful when you start to tweak some of these. You can see that there's a weather and then there's a season. So you've got whether it's nice and sunny or cloudy, or you've got, is it in winter? So not only can you change the light levels to come in winter quite low comparatively, and the time of day, you can say, I actually want it to be snowy. So you can move this along all the way to the season, and snow can appear on the trees and on the ground. Or you can bring it to maybe autumn period, and then as you change the line here, water starts to appear, rain starts to appear. So this is very good if you're going to do a static image, exporting it out, you can capture the rain as it was, or if you set out an animation or presentation, you can clearly have this element, and I think you can actually change the season over the time as well. So depending on the type of style of image that you want to come across when you're presenting, so improving your presentation is also understanding who you're presenting to. And if you do an image in Hong Kong, or if you do it in London, you might want to have something where it's a street scene, there's lots of shadows casting in the foreground, there's water on the pavement, there's a little bit of a drizzle to make it realistic. Clearly, you know, there's people without coats, so you have to match all of these things up. And as I move them across, it can get really sunny and the things dry out. So these three settings are quite good. Particles is another thing you want to keep on. That creates reflectance of particles in the sun, in the sky. So the sun comes, or the light sources come and hit those particles. And you can change the level of smog. So sometimes the focal point can be quite far, but you do want a little bit of fuzzy or haziness in the image as well. So all of these things affect, you can see this like a general blanket of cloudiness. Now, as I move that, and when you do the final render, remembering this as a preview, you can see that these things start to get a little bit hazy. So the contrast can change depending on the level of the smog. So what I've showed you is location, lighting, and weather, which are really adaptive things you can do, which improve the type of image that you've got very quickly. You might not want to use this as a bit of a toy. If you turn the water on, if you've got a ground and you can lift all the objects up and it's by the sea, you could then start to have a whole series of water points. You can add water later on as objects, but if you wanted something quick and easy, like maybe a beach scene and you've got a beach hut or a little object and you've got the water coming in, you can set the water level at a certain height, so that can be a lot quicker. And it's very good at doing cloud, sky, and water, unlike other rendering engines. So I've just hopefully explained to you lighting, location, and weather. And these apply for every image that you do. So, you know, I'm going to do it once. And then the camera is quite important. So I'll go over a couple of these. I can't imagine a situation where you wouldn't want, so you would always want parallelism on. So I don't know what it's going to do to this, but can you see corners of the image here? This happens a lot with Revit, if I remember correctly, is there's a parallax. The camera's kind of skewed around and it goes off and distorts it. So to make it look more like a virtual camera is the actual camera from a SLR, this button helps you to straighten these images out. I think we're all familiar with vignetting, so to make it look realistic on a 3D image, a lot of people, similar to Instagram, I suppose, back in the day, those filters, it's not quite visible on this one, I'll show you later maybe, is it's just about creating a haze and a darkness around the edge to focus people's mind into the center of the image, and it triggers something in people's mind that reminds them of an actual camera. Lens flare is sometimes, if you've got direct sun, you can get a little bit of, is it called Bokeh effect? So you're trying to create the conditions of replicating the camera. And then depth of field, clearly the depth of field is a distance. So if I make the distance smaller, it should be a little bit fuzzier. I think the camera might not pick up on this. I'll show you some images later which do. But the further the depth of field, in my view, sometimes the less realistic. And then the field of view, FOV, is another one. The smaller the number, the actual more realistic it is on a camera. So it's quite hard when you're doing visualizations. I've put it at 75. I think I have. You know, if there's, I think Pilo's very good at cameras, if I remember his hobby of photographing. And you know, some of these field of views are actually the wideness of the camera angle, and they're much smaller than 70. But what you don't want is these type of images where there's so much distortion at the edges of the image. The materials won't look very realistic. So always keep that about 65, 75. And when you've got light and things that go out of focus. This is what I was saying before, the bokeh shape is how many, I don't know if you've seen it, if you've got like a camera lens or if you wear glasses and you don't have a good field of view, when you see sharp lights, they break up into certain shapes, which is what these are. And the more number, it won't, I don't think it'll show up on this image, the more fuzzy I would say it is. So it might be like a square or a hexagon, maybe not an octagon. So you can play around with this to see if you want a certain style, and the aperture also makes a difference. I don't think it's going to make much of a difference on this image. Yeah. Okay, so you can change the camera a little bit in the depth of field, the focal length. I tend to keep it that much. You can see it does the same thing as the field of view. So let's keep it around 25. And then visual effects. One thing to remind, I don't want to go too much detail on this because this is stylistic. But what you can do is a lot of people choose, not this one, is color gradients. So this is like Instagram. I don't know if you know, when you publish something on an app, you can quickly pick a style. It might be black and white. It might be beauty. These are kind of similar things you might be familiar with. And I've picked blue tint again, just taking out the warm tones. I always use blue tint, but there's lots of other ones which you may feel add something to you. I wouldn't go too wild and imaginative. So if I click on this, you can see it just changes the levels. You know, if you're in Photoshop, you would change the levels here. So this is a bit of post-production on the photograph that you can do straight away. And I just tend to do blue tint. Contrast, I always have it below 50, but around 46. And then I also take the saturation down. So you just, you know, because if it's full 100%, it's just too much. So all of these little settings are the things that are going to improve your presentation and the images. So just to recap, parallelism on, depth of field on, that'll create a field of foreground and foreground. Vignetting on to some extent, keeping that about 25 mil, and then ideally I would do a color gradient. Now if you go back to image, here it was image 5, I would always just press this because I'm changing the camera settings to refresh. Now if I go to, let's go to this one. One thing you might be asked to do as students, and we'll go to camera. So I clicked on a different image. This is a different type of image. It's not an eye view at the same height as what you would be standing. It's not meant to be photorealistic, but what you can do very quickly is you can do a clay render. So if you, these tend to be, if you want to create a image which looks like a model, and I'll just click it, but it doesn't always work quite clearly because it's got the background as well. But one of the stylistic things is you could select the material here, which is the starting ground, and you can say, what am I going to include in the turning it into clay? So can you see that all of these are grouped in others? But when you drop in different elements, you can then create a kind of non-realistic model. So if you want to do a massing study very quickly, you could add people in here stylistically, you could animate it, and then you could also make it look like a massing model. So we could come back to that later on, and you can change the color of it. And you can change if it's kind of casting light and shadows. But the point being is you've got the option in Twinmotion to create photorealistic images. And there are videos on YouTube where you can say, how do I create a imaginary handmade model through a render? And that's one of the ways that you do it. You start to click on the clay render, and then you create like a base for it, and you could keep the trees white and then the people real, so it starts to pretend to be, looks like a handmade model. Okay, so that, hopefully that's okay with the, how do you create an image? So you go to media, you click on create image, and then what do you do with the camera settings, the lighting sections, and the location and the weather? So please tell me if you want any questions about like changing these levels. What I was going to do is show you another image and just show you how to bring in objects. So what I've been talking a lot about is the bottom piece. Now I'm going to talk about this left-hand side, and I'm just going to rotate around so you can see all these things here. Right? And you'll notice here another good thing, one of the defining things of Twinmotion is the ease to which you can bring in objects to make it look more realistic. And that would be either applying materials, bringing objects in, changing extra lights and other characters. So you might have seen that there was a person in the other camera image, right? So Twinmotion has bought Sketchfab and Quixel Megascans. These are two big databases of objects, and this object here is from Megascans. So when you go into the library, which is the left-hand side, so you click the library, you go into library, and you can choose what do I want to bring in. So let's just do it very simply, applying materials. So you've got your SketchUp file, you've imported it, you've then saved it as a Twinmotion file. Now you've created through media an image. You've got a couple of images at different angles, but you've still got this white model or this model which doesn't have materials, which look very good, right? So you've got a couple of choices how to do that, all on the same principle. I'll do the simple one first because you have to download some things to do the more complicated one. But when you open up the system, it's already got these predefined materials that you can look at. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick, I don't know, a wood material. So you can see there's metal, wood, brick, plastic, all these different things, ground, stones. So as an illustration, these aren't the greatest materials, but the principle of how you apply is really important. So if I click on this object, I've got an object, and you can see here, there's how do I apply a material? Do I apply it in a cubic way, cylindrical shape? And I'll hopefully be able to show you the difference between that. And then this other button, replace material, apply to object. So these two buttons are really important to be aware of when you're applying materials. You can see here, a lot of this is white. So if I grab this material, press on the left mouse button and drag, you can see, hopefully it will refresh quickly. It's gone a bit blurred, sorry about that. Can you see all of those materials which were white have gone to brown, which is this material. And because we're so far away, you can't really see the texture. But that's because I had replace material on. Now, if I do Control Z, it goes back to white. If I now press this button and apply to object, instead of applying to all the materials which are the same, I'm going to apply just to that one object. And that creates a new instance of that object with a material. So when you bring into SketchUp, you can have all of them the same materials. You don't collapse it. You remember when we imported it, we said keep the hierarchy. And then this means it's much quicker. You can just, like a paintbrush, apply these materials across. If you've got, did you see all these images here? As soon as I did that, what came up was a box that tells you about the material that I've got selected, and a box that tells you all the materials that are in your file here, in your image. So you can create, every time I drag it, I will create a new instance of that material. But also, I've got these other ones, and if I've just got one right, and I grab that, I can put that bark onto there. So you don't have to keep going back to this. This is within the model that you've got them. So if I zoom into this, apologies if it's a little bit blurry because my computer, let it refresh. So can you see I've got a color, reflection, scale, weather, settings. So I can change the scale of, oh, I'm on the wrong material. So I can change the scale of this, and you might not be able to make it out here. As it gets bigger, it's obviously moving up and down. So that's a very simple thing you must be familiar with in other settings. And you can click on the weather. So some materials get affected by when you change the seasons in your camera. You can change the reflection. There's all of these things which are more, so you can change the rotation of it if you think it's not quite right. You can change where it starts. So this will change. Can you see the way it's kind of moving around? So I'm just playing around with it just to illustrate the point. And my breadcrumbs here, so I can go back to scale and I can change the speed. Some materials have the ability to be animated. So the speed at which they move is that one, but that's not really important for today. And then you can have an overlay color from this, so you can change the color tint to it, but generally you don't really want to do that. The other thing is the bumps are very important if you want a textured thing that creates a little bit of shadow and more realistic. Sometimes you might want two-sided, and the glow unit tends to be 0 because you can turn these objects into, now if I do this right, yeah, you can turn this into like a light source. So in the night, that could glow, and you can change the luminance effect and dusk to dawn. So if it only glows during the night, you can click that button. So I'm just trying to illustrate at this stage. We've done importing, we've done the camera and the image, and what I'm talking about now is the material and how you apply a material. So let me go back to this material. Let's go to mud settings. Let's get rid of the glow, so it goes back to 0. So please do speak up if you want any settings. I'm just trying to give you a quick speed through. You could then spend hours applying all these different materials to this image. Now, clearly, if I do glass, I'll just do one more because I don't think it's that important as a principle to go through. Can you see the glass is there? There's probably not much to show through from this camera view, but the reflection is coming already. So you can see as I change it, the lightness of this will change and it'll be more transparent. So you can just pick whichever material you've got. The other thing I want to show you about materials before we move on to anything else is that these materials, surfaces, 3D plans, 3D assets, right? So there is a bigger and better catalogue of materials. So if we go to wood here, we've got up parquet. This is relying on the internet connection because it's taking it from the cloud and it's bringing down. And one thing to remind you is if you want to use these materials, you have to sign in when you've created the account. So to be able to download and open the software, you've had to sign in with your own account. Then this little button appears and you can then press it and it will download that specific material to your computer, and then you can drag and drop, as I have, onto those materials. So if you ever get stuck and think, why is it not working? Why can't I get this material onto here? It may be that you've not downloaded it. And there's lots of choices here. So we'll go into this in a little bit. But you can really see that what these have done, people have actually created really detailed scans of real materials. So again, my image I'm showing you is not the most photorealistic image just right now, but using these materials, you can get copies of what was out there in the real world. So that's the difference of how improving your presentation is. You start to select the right materials at the right scale. So bear in mind that, but you can click materials here, or you can go into quick some mega scans. I'm hoping, because I can't see anybody at the moment, that you're still there and you can still hear me. Let me just go. So that's basic materials. Let's go to a different image and show you something about people. So let's go back to this one. Can you see there's some people talking? So there's a static person who's 3-dimensional. When you bring in your SketchUp, you probably have a person or an image of a person coming in to give you the scale. But Twinmotion always replace the trees and the people with Twinmotion. So you can see that there's characters here. We've got animated people, we've got posed humans, we've got cutout. So these are 2D people. So if you've only taken one image that you ever want, you can just use that. But you've got 3D people here. Right? And if I click on this object, you can see that this person has the same grab bars. I can rotate them. So they're a fully rendered person. I can lift them up. And the interesting thing is, if I hit the middle of this little yellow quarter of a sphere, it will snap them back down to the ground. So if you do accidentally lift somebody up or lift something from the ground and you want to put it back, as you move it, what's good about that is it will try to, if I'm right on certain objects, it'll try to link it to the floor level. So it'll go onto that material and then it'll go onto this material. So I'm sorry if it's pixelating. My computer, if you've got a more powerful computer, it's instant. It will not pixelate. It will just do it instantly. Right? So that's a static person who casts their own shadow. So that's really good in terms of if I move them over here, and it'll probably be like a very small shadow. You can see the shadow is actually being carried. The other person is that there's animated people. And so, I don't know, let's grab that person, put them there. I've clicked on it. You can see Michael has appeared here. You can change the color, you can change the pose. So they can be lying down, they can be sitting, dancing, walking. So sometimes that's helpful walking if you're doing animation. So you can add an element of realism, you can give them a pathway. Speaking or idle, right? So you can set up these scenes, and each of these people, you can pick the one that's most suitable for the scene that you're creating, and they've got lots of them. So that's an element. So what I'm talking about now is you've applied materials. You can click on these materials, and they are different objects. You can change the scale of the concrete, and the same principle applies to the objects you place into the scene. So we just talked about characters. Obviously, you can put animals if you wanted to. Birds, flying butterflies, that would be quite handy. And you can also carry in vegetation and landscape. So trees are a very good one. Grasses and flowers, detailed bushes, rocks are very good. So you can bring in a rock, and it might not feel, why would you do that? And Keith, please tell me if I'm going too slowly. But I'm just trying to say the principle is you can make this, you can click on here and you go into the rock, and then there's a little button down here and you can say, well, what's the statistics of this? What's the transform of it? And you can see the scale here comes in, and you can change the scale from that point. So you can sometimes change the scale here and it'll stretch it in these directions. Again, sorry if you can't see that. Or you can change the scale of the object here. So you can start to play around with it. But what you can very quickly do is you can then start to put grass, sorry, press the button. Or you can put bushes, probably the easiest one, isn't it? And you can select something which might be a series of ferns or plants or flowers. And you can start to drag and drop them in front of the plants. And if I get out of moving that. So you can start to build up the patchwork of materials that you've got in front of you. That doesn't look very realistic, so that's probably something we replace. But all of the principles are the same thing. You just start to add grasses and flowers, different types of flowers, grab them, put them in here, and you can duplicate them. So if it did come into a more photorealistic shot, you'd start to apply them. So to be able to do that, I think maybe I'll show you one where I've just grabbed an object. So if I just move over here, you can see there's an object here I've already imported, abandoned warehouse interior. So you may do a building and you want something in the background, and this Quixel Megapixels already has objects and I can't remember where I put it. Buildings. Let's see if I can find it through abandoned. Warehouse abandoned. So it might not be in buildings. Hold on. Let's go to mega scans. Yeah, this one here, right? So what I've done is I pressed the download button. It's taken a few seconds to, it was actually in Sketchfab. So Sketchfab and Megapixels are the same type of thing. They get people from the cloud to upload their scans of buildings. And all I've done is downloaded it. I've then grabbed it and placed it into here. And let me just check, are you still there? Yeah. I think Twinmotion might have just crashed. Oh, okay. So it's trying to import it there. So apologies. This is why it's slowed down, as it's already trying to upload it into my image. So we'll just give it a few seconds to recalibrate itself. If I press escape, let's see if it. You can see it's kind of struggling to. Yeah, there you go. Right, okay, so I've got rid of that. I've got one in. I then can go where you first started. This is the object. And let me just go to preferences, quality. Let's just bring these down because I think it's struggling my computer. There you go. Okay, so because it's a laptop, it can't do the preview as the best scenario, right? And it takes a bit of time. If you're on a desktop, you could hit all those into ultra quality and it will do a very quick thing. So you can see that I've just come inside the building. What I've also done is the outside of the building, I've added a few things which are objects. I've also imported these objects as the same way, really. So I've just gone into Sketchfab or Lightings and dropped them in. I've dropped some people in. And then what I've done is I've added all these objects. So I've gone and found in Sketchfab different cards. You can see if you can upload them. Furniture and home, architecture. I go to megapixels. I tried to upload these quickly for you so that you could see that I'm not wasting time. But 3D assets, you could go into street and you can have a traffic cone and you can, I don't know, download that. I don't know how long it's going to take. Props, bin bags. So you can see what I've selected here, bin bags, trees, right? All these things you can add. This is called a decal. So if I go back to 3D assets, you've also got this thing called decals. And all of these things called debris, streets, you might have a pothole. All of these are little details. So this is like a manhole cover. You can see here, I can drag that and put it onto the street. There's a little painting on the street here, which is another decal. So when you're adding your image and you've got like a simple material that you've applied to it, you can go in here and you can add little bits that make it more realistic. You could go into vegetation and trees. Very difficult. I would say the best trees are the ones that got roots on them because they've been rendered slightly differently to the previous versions of trees. And I'm just looking for one which, you know, what would be appropriate in this type of I feel like a kind of chestnut or a plane tree, birch, maybe birch. So can you see, this isn't probably the best tree actually. But when you do bring in plants, you can see it's got the age. I can make this younger or older. But the important thing for me, I'm not looking necessarily at the tree. What I'm looking for is, can I move it off the camera and can I create a shadow on the street, on the pavement? And I can change the height, I can change the growth, the bark tint, whether it's on season. So what that means is that if I change the season, I hope I'm not losing people, but what I'm telling you now is how to apply materials, set up an image, how to drop in objects, 3D assets to make it more realistic, and then drop in trees. And if I go to the camera that I'm in here, press more, and I go to weather, you can see that if I then start to change the scene and change the weather condition, if it's more stormy, you can see the water starts to appear on the pavements. Hopefully you can see that snow starts to appear, but also the trees' leaves disappear. So if we get it right, get rid of the snow. It's just about to start snowing, isn't it? And then if we get the water, you can see that the light levels change. There's kind of reflection of the water on the brick. Some of the leaves are still there, but they're actually falling off the tree. And there's different points of light source. And then you might say, well, I want it in the spring where the light is changing. So what I'm trying to say is you can drop the best and simplest way to make and enhance your image is to get a good shot with the objects that you've got from SketchUp, then spend a decent amount of time looking at all the library assets that you've got, whether it's materials, whether it's vegetation, whether it's characters, whether it's different objects, and then start to put them into the scene and then change the weather. And clearly I can change the lighting, I can change, if I go to the other image, I think this one's on a different, the difference between these two is one is, one is on it. I can't find the. Yeah, this one I think is on the normal sky, which is the 3D glow. So that's why this is grayed out. So I can only change the time of day on this one. But if I go to the other image, this one, and then I change the location, you can see that I can move this around and I can change the month and I can change the north point and the shadows will change. So when you're setting up a scene, you're trying to create a foreground of a person. This isn't meant, it's just a 3D view, something in the middle ground, something in the background, and then opportunities to cast shadows all the way across. And you can change the time of the day, see if the shadows come in a little bit light. You can see that sometimes it's a bit too high contrast. So there is an element of spending enough time to tweak those settings. So hopefully I'm not going too quickly. I just wanted to show you, first of all, how to import something. Second of all, how to create an image. Third, how to manipulate shapes and bring in assets. Then how to apply materials. And then start to bring in shadows, and you can change those settings. So what I wanted to do before anything else was just do two last things. You notice just on these last things, right? I didn't talk about render before, but this ray tracer is really good at doing renders. So if you get a computer high enough, you can, it says it's not applicable, this piece of computer, right? So that will be able to be turned on, and it would even increase the quality of this image, because this is just a preview. The other thing is that you've got primitive decal city particles. You can add in things like smoke and fire, so that's why you want to. But in terms of setting the scene, you might want to have that, or you might want to have a bit of smoke coming in, which I think is coming in that part of the, yeah, you can start to see it's so subtly coming in. So there's particles that you can add in, which are not quite objects. And then lights, the other thing that is really critical. This is an outside scene, so you're less likely to get so many lights. But if you do an inside image, you're going to use all these. And Twinmotion has a really good set of different types of light that you can cast in. So you can just drag and drop those light sources. You could do you could pick an object that looks like a light. You can change the angle of those lights to bring them as a downlighter. Attenuation is how much does it go through the ground or penetrate. So we don't really want it to do very much. And how far. So there's a combination between that, turn the shadows on, and turn the intensity down. It's a bit difficult, so maybe I'll do it by hand. So can you see, these are called lumens. So you could create an object from your library, which is like a downlight, a street lighting, and then that might even only be 4. So you could set up street lighting to do that, and that's what happens with the object. So when you go into here and objects, and I think city bollards, street lights, you could create a street light. This one actually has got luminance, so not sure why it's coming so big. But let's go back to the camera angle that we want. Click there, and then we're going to click scale, and we'll just, oh, I'm not actually marking that, so let's just do by 20. So you can make it smaller, whichever size you want. This one, on the setting of the object, if you go to this object, I wonder whether it's got a setting on it, because sometimes you have to grab the light, this one, and place it into the actual object to make it lighter. So there's lots of furniture that you could use to enhance the image. And so when you're doing SketchUp, all you really need is the building elements, knowing which ones are windows and doors, and then you can start to apply materials in here and spend more of your time on this object. Now, I don't want to do that. Let's go back here. So quick media, go back into here and then into this one. And the other thing I just wanted to show you is it primitives or is it? Yeah, here, tools, right? So the other things you can do, maybe we haven't got time today to go into all the sections and animations, but another thing is the glass, when it comes in and you apply it, you might notice that there doesn't seem to be many reflections. So I've actually added something which is meant to increase the reflection. So if I turn it on and off, you can see there's just a subtle change. And when you render it, it's even more prevalent when we export this image. So we've got objects, we've got materials, we've got lights, and then we've got a thing called reflection probes. And you can have a square one or a spherical one. So if you notice that the glass isn't doing a lot, the reason I imported that warehouse was to create the backdrop to this wall. And you can see the skylight windows at the background that are in, you can see the furniture and the detritus inside the room. But also there's a piece of glass where you want reflections. And so I would grab a reflective cube and put it anywhere in front or along next to a window. And what that does is it tells the computer where do I want to start thinking about the reflections and where am I going to grab them from? So you can change the size of this thing. You can see here, you can turn it off and on. Sometimes if you're using a lot of power, you don't always update it, but the brightness and the size, if I increase the size, you can see it gets bigger. So you want to play around with enough space where it captures the environment around it and then it applies that reflection to those pieces of glass. And the transition is the difference between these two boxes. So if I increase this, one of those should, so you can see it starts off, it's only looking at the reflections in the small bit, and applying those reflections, and it's taking the bigger area to kind of draw how far back does it take in a way it's like the depth of the reflection. So that's something that you add. So to improve the render, it's good materials, good props, objects, good lights, and good reflections. That's the 4 type of things that I've hopefully showed you where you can go to play around with them. Is everybody still there? Just check. And then I think any more detail than that will get, you kind of lose track of what you can do yourself. So just to summarize before I go into it, output and getting the images out, open the file, create an account, and start Twinmotion. Importing a SketchUp file from the bottom left, dropping it into the space. Then you've got the background and the camera and how to change the camera and create images and adapt them with the weather and the location. Then you've got how to manipulate the materials and apply materials either onto one object or onto all the objects of the same material. You could spend 80% of your time getting those materials right in terms of the scale of the material map, getting it bigger and smaller, the color tones, the bump level, how much it does have a thickness to it. So there's lots of settings you can change there. And then the last few things I've just been describing is the props, how to drop in trees to create shadows. They don't have to be in the scene, they can be outside. How to drop objects that other people have made. You can go to Sketchfab, somebody else has created it 3-dimensionally or scanned a bin bag and you drop it in. Then changing the camera to create the right type of shadows, and the shadows are also affected by the light and the reflections, aren't they? So how to drop in a light, how to look at the glass and add a reflective cube into it. And these are all dynamic things. So you'll move around the camera view, the focal point, the distance, how much rendering, the weather. So I'm just trying to point you to, in the very first session of a Twinmotion, is where to find these things and which are the most important ones to do. I'm going to save this. Is it going to take a while to save? I always worry a little bit with this computer because it might take a while to save. So the last thing I wanted to do in terms of things that help you is to get them into the software and then get it out of the software. And I think the first task you could do would be to get an image out of it, a very simple render that you would use. So you'll use the bottom left-hand side here, and you'll go back to the media and you'll check which images have I got. Have I got ones which I want to create a backdrop to? Maybe I'd like to see this one in the sky, change the sky if I wanted to. But this is the things that the portfolio that you can choose from when you're doing the output. So when we go to output, if you've got the license, you can create different things. You can create a panorama, an empty video, and a presentation. So you can see that these local things and cloud access, you're more likely to have access to these, and they relate directly to panorama, video, presentation, panorama set. So if you haven't got anything in these things, it will say empty, or you've not selected them. So first of all, you can click on here, and if your computer was fast enough, you could click that box and it would then be able to export these with the absolute top rendering engine. I don't have this on this laptop, so it can only do so much. But what you're really doing is just either selecting all, or you're just going to say, I want this one, and I want this one, I don't want that one. So you can see there's a little white box around them. And when you move away from the black box, it will drop down again and it will say multi. So now the computer knows that you're going to export more than one image. You're just going to say, what's the format? You know, I never know whether PNG or JPEG is better. My view is PNG keeps the transparency. We're not using 3D mode. And then depending on the power of your computer, when you want to do a final render, you want to do it as high as your computer can allow. Now, just if you didn't hear when I first said, the good thing about Twinmotion is it gets, with computers, it gets as close as it can to what it will look like as an export. So unlike Revit and Lumion, or maybe Lumion's okay now, but other rendering engines, it used to be the preview was very, very far away from what you were going to export. So you would spend too much time exporting the image just to see how good it is and is it close to what you want. Where this one, if you've got a fast enough computer, it will get very, very close to it. But this is telling it, do you want maximum lighting, or bouncing all the light around the particles, the reflections? If you've got people walking, or if you've got the weather in such a way where there's leaves falling, it might be motion blurs necessary. And then refinement is just really tracing all of the different elements and particles on the materials to create a realistic image, and you can higher or lower that. So I think I'm do high, medium, sorry. And that's it really, you just click there. And then if I, the last button, so you go through here, which one you want to do, and you press start export. And what it will ask you to do is just pick the folder. It doesn't ask you for a file name, it's got an auto naming system. So all you can do is actually pick the folder which you want those multiple images to be rendered into. Now, if I go here, I'll just, can I preview all of these? I'll just take for speeds so we don't sit here watching it export. I just wanted to show you some earlier ones which, if I do that, will it come up? So you can see I've added different trees, I've changed the time of day, I've added different types of shadows by the different focal points, and there's only very subtle differences in these, but I think if I show you the differences, there's ever so slightly changes in the angles, the transparency is different, and the level of yeah, I'm just trying to get a couple of these right. So here's one with water, with rain. Here's one with, so you can see it's tried to distort. I mean, it's not the most photorealistic thing, so forgive me if you think you can do better, but it's just the principle that each of these shadows, the type of sky that you do, the lightness levels, the focal length, can tell you how far away the shadows are being cast and then how blurred they are. So this is what I mean by, you will do the renders, and if we go into Twinmotion now, and we just cancel this and go back to the images, you can see the shadows aren't very good on my laptop. There's a few shadows. There's a couple of trees over here casting leaves. But when you render it, sometimes it goes really stark and the outlines of the shadows are very stark. You can see the line very clearly. You might not want that. There might be too much luminance here, so you can drop down the end, the drop off of it. And the same applies to these type of quick renders. You can see these people have stopped moving, stop moving, but their shadows are all there. There's a very stark outline of the shadows. So it's not for me to say, hey, this is the most realistic image that you can create. It's more for me to say, all of these things, the materials on the object, the camera settings, which I've showed you, the lights, the reflections, the shadows, the time of day and the weather, they all go together. And if you can carve out enough time for you to tweak each of these elements. I've given you some starting points where the light level needs to be a certain area. As an example, the exposure might be here, auto exposure's on, you can keep that. You can change the height of the reflection and the lighting, sun intensity, you can change that. So you will go back and forth as little as possible, but you will have to try to tweak these. There's not always a case for me to say, set them at all at this level and it'll be perfect. The best way to do it is to go onto YouTube, and on Twinmotion they have their own how-to visual effects. And what you can do is you can go through and go, oh, there's an outside image that I want to replicate with my building, or there's an internal shot, or there's a shot which is in the middle of the forest. So they've got all of these different types of camera views, whether it's close up into a kitchen, whether it's far away, whether it's a street scene in the city. And they were, I've taken a long time to go quite slowly through the different location of buttons, but they will go reasonably quickly, and you can stop and start for about 30 minutes, and they'll tell you the levels that you have to set on each of the things I've introduced to you today to get close to that image. So what I would normally do is search for that type of video on the image I want, the image I want, then I'd have that on one screen, I'd watch it, and then I would open up my SketchUp file in Twinmotion, and I would copy the steps that they went through to get the same output. So my introduction is less about follow this step to get this image out. It's more about this is how you get in to Twinmotion. These are the things which I think maybe was that 4 or 5 things was the most important thing to adapt and change and where to find them. And this is how you go out. And of course, a presentation is click here to add media. So a presentation would be a collection of those images, and you can shift between the two. So it might animate them between the two, or it might switch to all of those things. So I don't know if there's time to go through that, or there's time to go through a video and what you're trying to do. Moving the viewport and click here. So can you see I would go around a keyframe. I mean, just rotate it too much. Ooh. Let's just see how far I can get. And then click that one. And then click this one and go back. And update that one. So can you see that if you wanted to create a video, all you're doing is doing a keyframe. So that's not too difficult, is it? So then you would export that video and click on that one and export it. So my talking feels a little bit long, so I'm going to pause there. I don't know what time it is. 4:34. So I've spoken quite a long time there, but hopefully you get an idea of the aspects that are important to Twinmotion. I'll just pause sharing just for a moment. So summarize, SketchUp file, SKP, open Twinmotion, install it, sign in, import the file, keep the hierarchy, so options, keep hierarchy, drop it into your file. You can move around, go to media, create image, create multiple images, then slowly set the camera view you want, then apply materials, change the sky settings, apply objects, play around with those different settings, add lights, add reflections, and then you're about ready to hit export. Click on the images you want to export and then start export. So, and that's it really. That's as far as we go in terms of the navigation of it.
So Simon, I have one question.
Yeah.
About the path tracer, you mentioned about the laptop have not enough powers for the display other things, because most of our students are using the same laptop actually. So does it affect the quality of the image if we don't have the path tracer?
It does affect it, but it's acceptable without it. So all of the, I mean, if you feel that the images I've shown, and I've only done them very quickly, I've not spent a lot of time creating those images. I just did it for this presentation just to say this is what you could do. They're without path tracer, so they can still do a reasonable go. But what you can do is you can do the majority of the work on a laptop and then find one computer which does have a graphics card and export it at the very last minute through a different computer. So my view is to increase your presentation skills from Revit to SketchUp, use Lumion or Twinmotion and you will get a better image. You can do that on a laptop, but I would control how much of the scene that you see. So I would definitely have something which is reasonably close up. I wouldn't do a street scene where you're very far away and there's lots of information for the rendering engine to do. And the level of detail of the amount of lights you put in, the amount of reflections you put in will slow down the computer to do that. And two things it will slow it down with. One is, if I just show you again, just very quickly, I'll share my screen. So if I go to Twinmotion now, and I go to preferences. So when you're using a laptop, it will automatically set the highest point it can fit. So it'll be medium normally, but if you're using a laptop, I would set it something like this. And then every now and again, you might try to say, well, if I click on high on the shadows, on the effects and on the textures, it will slow my computer down a little bit because it will take, that pixelation, but I will get close to the final output. And the buttons that I showed you on the export here where it said medium motion, it might be that you have to keep it at medium and max lighting off and motion blur off. It might not be able to handle high. So that's the difference between having a laptop used or having a desktop used. I think it's the speed at which you can move around, see the preview, and how close the preview gets to the final one. And if you don't have a graphics card, when you press start export, it will just take a little bit longer than if you had a desktop. A desktop would do it much quicker. But this, and if you do like a video, clearly it's going to take time because it's going to do each bit, like it's going to do the rendering engine at different scenes, and it's going to decide how many scenes it are. Yeah, virtual RAM, I think that's probably right. 6 gigabytes is the minimum. I think 8 to 12 is probably ideal, and physical RAM on a GPU is better, not just this one that I've got now. Processors is, i7 upwards is good, but I think you can get good enough images. I would be very pleased to see a student in a degree. I'm not trying to say, look how good my drawings are, but I'm saying that like that's not a bad level of quality for a short amount of time at degree level. The images I've shown, you may think I can do better than that and I can make it even more realistic, but that's just degrees of improvement in my view. If the idea of today was how to improve your presentation, the first thing would be to use Twinmotion or Lumion, and you will get better result. And then the second part is setting up the right camera angle, making sure it's realistic in terms of the camera angle, how wide it is, the focal distance, the light levels, whether it's a blue tint or not. So those are some of the things that I would focus in on as well. So hopefully that answers your question, Keith.
Yes, very much. Thank you. So students, any questions you can ask, or you can type in the chat room.
Any language as well, you can translate as well.
Yeah, sure. So when are you coming to Hong Kong? I miss you.
I don't know is the answer. We had a meeting in UCLan. We would like to come as soon as possible, but I think that's the staff saying that. The university actually has to have a position of what's achievable and what's a manageable risk. I think sometimes universities and institutes are a little bit cautious about if we get stuck and we get tested positive and we'd have to stay. I think they're still on their minds about that. So I think Shape and VTC could talk to the people in the university. I would like to think that we'd be able at the end of our semester, which is March, but I can't give that as a guarantee. But it would be nice, yeah. It would be nice to come and see people and look at people's work and give comment and help them on the computer face to face. That would be, I think, an interaction we would like to do. So I don't know, when did you say you're going to do an exhibition? You felt that you're going to do something public? Is this a digital presentation? Or?
Yeah, sure. So I think all the students, especially those degree students, are looking forward to seeing you in Hong Kong, face to face. Yeah.
Well, I think Shape could continually ask, shall we say. It would always be interesting if Shape said from their point of view, we would like you to come, and then the university would have to respond, wouldn't it? And so you'd have the staff saying we can go, and then the university saying our partners want us to go. So maybe you keep asking us, and we can come earlier.
Yeah, right. Okay, so students, any questions? Any more questions? And Fred, are you here?
Simon, hi. Fred.
Hi, Fred.
Yeah, just a question actually. Related. Well, as far as you know, among the UK architectural practice.
Yeah.
Do you know that the Twinmotion software, is it popular among? Or is it an essential skills for the graduates if they want to work in a UK architectural practice?
Yeah, I think over the last year the situation or the scene, shall we say, has changed quite a lot. So two things. It's always been the case that each office tends to have, by habit, their own type of what software they would use. And it was about 4 years ago, Lumion. That used to be the most common. But because Twinmotion used to be, I don't want to get too technical, like Twinmotion used to be its own company. It's been bought by Epic Games. They bought Mega Pixel or Quixel Scans. They bought Sketchfab. So what architects have realized now is people are making copies of cities. I haven't shown you. One thing is if you drop your image in, you can also drop in a massing model of the city. So you can go and find the city and it'll just drop in the background of all the streets and the buildings roughly at the right height. So architects in Europe and the UK are starting to realize this is much quicker for them to do in Twinmotion. So I don't have the figures, but a lot of people are starting to use it. And if you went to an office and said, I can use Twinmotion, I think they would be very pleased with that, because there's an integration with Revit and SketchUp, because Revit's a BIM software and SketchUp is a kind of generative software, isn't it? It's not quite the same as BIM. It doesn't have the data. So because they've got direct links between those two, you can talk to somebody we're using SketchUp in the office. They've got control of that SketchUp folder, and you might be just controlled of the Twinmotion. And when they've updated that, you can ask them to export or just to update your file. So the short answer is yes, and I think it's going to change it, but I don't have the figures to tell you how many offices, because there will be some offices that just stick with what they've done in the past. I mean, I used to use Atlantis, I think it was. But if you really think about like Maya, 3D Studio Max, Lumion, and Twinmotion, there's not that many rendering engines out there, and people who use 3D Studio Max and Maya to some extent is because their licenses that they've bought AutoCAD architecture or they've bought Revit, and that's part of that package that they can export. But because Twinmotion is free for us, and it's only something like £450 for a commercial license, it's so cheap that I think you'll find that people will use that quite a lot now, and it's quicker. So the speed is one of the, even if you go to an office and you go look at these amazing images and they get really excited, and they just happens to not use Twinmotion. One thing I would say is the price is very cheap for that office to buy it, and two things, so you can promote it, is the speed. Because it's built by this rendering engine, it's quicker than all the other rendering machines out there to do this path tracing and stuff. So it's going to be quicker for an office to not outsource that to an official visualization company. I think there's another rendering machine, but I can't remember the name. Is it
Enscape?
Yes. Enscape, yeah. So there is a speed thing there, right? So my computer's a bit slow, but if you have a proper desktop, if your office pays for, 2 graphics cards, one dedicated to this and a decent motherboard and stuff, you can pump out images really, really quickly, and you can just get the basics, the model in a very loose form and allow a lot of adding to it in the Twinmotion. So that's the key benefit I see.
Cool.